Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about multi-cloud computing, particularly a strategy called multi-cloud by default, which has caused some major challenges for cloud customers. To discuss that, I'm joined by someone who knows a lot about the topic. With me is Chad Dunn, Vice President of Product Management for Dell eSPEAKS. Chad, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, James, really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So the idea of multi-cloud by default, I mean, it's caused problems for companies because they've got multi-cloud deployments in many different platforms. They've got a database here, they've got another application over here.
Mhm.
There's sort of a real mixed grab bag of deployments. What are the issues with this multi-cloud by default strategy?
Um, well, I think that's just it. Multi-cloud by default is not a strategy, right? Multi-cloud by default is the state that you find yourself in. You don't feel it coming. It sort of creeps up on you.
Mhm.
And the reason that happens is if you look at what's happening inside of these larger companies, you've got these innovation engines in the lines of business who want to seek the best tools, want to seek the best services, want to seek the best availability to innovate for their company. And very often cloud is a very fast way to do that, to be able to onboard and take advantage of some of those best of breed services. Those could be things like AI ML tools, they could be IoT, they could be databases, speech recognition, right? It's a very rich world of services that live in the hyperscaler instances. So what happens is the different lines of businesses are going to adopt those tools. They're going to adopt those clouds. And at some point, the IT organization is going to turn around and look and understand that they're in a lot more clouds with a lot more workloads in a lot more places than they thought they were. And then two things are going to happen. They're going to consider the exposure of compliance, of security, of management and stewardship of the data and the workloads. And then they're going to look at the cost. And a lot of times, these invoices can be pretty complicated. So when you finally add up the cost of your multi-cloud by default estate that you may or may not know the extent of, it can be a pretty big number. And more, what we're encouraging customers to transition to is a multi-cloud by design approach, where you're mindful and thoughtful about workload placement and making those choices and understanding which ones might need to come back on-prem and which ones need to stay in the cloud.
The really odd thing that I hear about is a certain amount of repatriation going on. So companies are moving workloads back from the cloud back in-house, which, back when the cloud was really taking off, 2010, 2012, I never thought we'd be sitting here in 2023 saying, well, we're moving back away from the cloud, back to the data center. I mean, repatriation seems like a pretty odd idea. Is it actually a fix for companies?
I think in a lot of cases it is, but I don't want to leave you with the impression that repatriation is something that every company is doing, right? There are a lot of workloads that belong in the cloud, right? That's the right place for them, the right set of tools, the right availability, the right latency for the workload that they happen to be running.
Hmm.
But as again, two things happen. One we first discussed, which is lines of business, looking to innovate with those tools. But the other is we saw in the early days a lot of top down mandates. We will go to the cloud from the CIO, and by the time that gets to the people who actually have to go put things in the cloud, it's sort of okay. Well, what do you mean? And let's get to the cloud and let's wholesale move as much as we can there. And then again, you get that sort of you look at the check at the end of the day and go, wow, I don't remember eating that much, and what costs so
Right,
much, and it becomes
right.
that cloud. So we do see instances of it, right? It's some workloads where it just doesn't make sense, either from a technology perspective or from an economic perspective, to continue to have that workload in the cloud. I'll give you a couple of examples. So, the company called 37 Signals. So, they started to repatriate workloads, and their estimate is by spending around 600K on Dell servers, they would save $7 million over 5 years.
Wow.
Now, that's the extreme, right? So, your mileage will vary,
Mhm.
but for them, that's incredibly meaningful for their business. Um, let's talk about another company, Ahrefs. Now, they believe they save 400 million over 3 years by keeping workloads resident on premises and obviously on Dell infrastructure, which we love. Um, and that to them is really cost avoidance. They had to go through a pretty substantial study and understand what the long-term costs would be. Now, that's sort of a company who avoided multi-cloud by default because they were mindful, meaningful about the way that they examined and they understood the economics and the unique workload requirements before they made a wholesale move. So,
Mhm.
kudos to them for that incredible cost avoidance.
Interesting. I mean, do you think that there's a certain type of workload specifically, whether it's databases or another type of workload that is better suited to repatriation than others?
Look, it really depends. Cost is not the only factor in repatriation or having it live in the cloud. A lot of times it is the tool set that's there. It is the database, right? So if you're creating a dependency in your workload on some of those things, then yeah, it's going to be sticky to the cloud. You're probably not going to import the AI ML capabilities that you're getting in cloud and implement that on-prem as fast as you could consume it in the cloud. It's physics.
Yep.
So there's another aspect of data gravity. So how I can get my data in. How much does it potentially cost to take out? Is there another place I can put it? Is there a way that I can avoid, some of that cost, which is also part of our multi-cloud strategy here at Dell.
Mhm. I want to talk about Dell Apex specifically, but I'd like to get one more sense of like the larger portrait of what's going on out there with multi-cloud by default. Do you think it's a really widespread phenomenon, or is it just a certain amount of certain percentage of companies that are struggling with the idea?
It is, very often there's not a black and white answer, but this one is yes, it's everywhere. Um,
I thought so.
we look at it. Yeah, we look at our customers. So 90% of them are hybrid cloud, which is completely to be expected.
Mhm.
75% of them have found themselves in the multi-cloud situation, and 90% of that 75% have three or more major cloud instances. So
Mhm.
it's become a big part of their business, and that really doesn't even count the sort of line of business projects that take place in the cloud as well. So yeah, it's pretty much everywhere if you're one of the larger companies out
Hmm. Well, okay, so let's drill down into Dell Apex. What is the Dell Apex advantage, and how does it relate to the multi-cloud world?
there. Well, so we try to address the problem in really two ways. So one is a ground to cloud strategy. And what do we mean by that? Very easy to say. It's taking the storage technology, the data services that we have, and then extending those so that they can exist in the public cloud as well, and then providing seamless mobility to and from the cloud while staying in that same storage paradigm, right? Taking advantage of all those data services of replication, of deduplication, et cetera, et cetera. And that means that now you can have mobility of that data easily between cloud instances back to your data center or potentially in co-location, which is an area that we see growing very quickly. So basically, that's expressing our software IP in the cloud as opposed to in an array. Now, the second piece of that looks to address some of those services that customers do depend on and some of the ecosystems in which they develop. If you're an Amazon developer, you're developing in EKS and you're using a lot of those tools, a lot of the tool chains. Um, but some of the workloads may make sense to have on-prem. Some of the data that you would operate on in those workloads must be on-prem. You physically or for compliance reasons can't move that data into the cloud. So in that case, we're attacking that with multi-cloud appliances that bring that operating model on-prem, running on Dell infrastructure. So that gives you sort of the best of both worlds, right? You're able to access some of those cloud services in that development environment within the four walls of your data center or co-location, and you're able to seamlessly move data back and forth to and from the cloud using the same storage technology. We think that's just incredibly powerful.
Mhm. To what extent are people using Dell Apex as a multi-cloud management tool?
Really, to a great extent, and you'll see some of the products that are upcoming where this is really, the center of the platform, shall we say, like the Dell platform of, offering these services and managing them from one place, orchestrating your data mobility, or
Mhm.
orchestrating your multi-cloud appliances and moving those workloads back and forth. That all is part of Apex, but also Apex is a consumption model at the same time. So if you think about the flexibility of cloud and all the services that are there and all the capabilities are there and what we're doing from a technology perspective, there's another piece of that. There's how you pay, how you pay for it, how you consume it. Right? We could certainly, you can certainly buy equipment outright, and that's been our business and many other companies' businesses for years and years and years. But more and more customers are choosing to consume on a subscription basis, or a different way of paying. Not necessarily owning that infrastructure in a lot of cases is going to make sense for them financially. Of course, every customer has to make their choice, but Apex gives them that flexibility.
Hmm. All right. Well, let's look to the future of multi-cloud computing, because I think a lot of companies are very concerned with where it's going because they need to get ready for that now. What do you see when you see the look at the future of multi-cloud, say like 3 to 5 years out?
Well, look, multi-cloud is the norm. That's obvious. How we all get our arms around it and rationalize what workloads go where, and how we manage the challenge and opportunity of ground to cloud and cloud to ground. We're really at the beginning of unlocking the power of using both on-premises, co-location, and public cloud, multiple public clouds. So right now, the advice that I would give to any company is be thoughtful in your approach to workload placement. Right, um, that's step one, and that's probably one of the easier steps to take. You really got to look at what are the services required, what is the latency and performance required, what's the geographic availability required, and do the math and understand where it makes sense to run that workload. Because is easier to get the workload into the cloud than to repatriate it. You
Hmm.
start to create dependencies. Some of those dependencies can't follow the workload or the data back on prem. So basically, it's be thoughtful of that, understand the cost, know what you're in for.
Chad, I think you said it. It's a lot of interesting stuff. I think obviously it's going to be a really hot sector to follow in the years ahead. Please come back and talk with us again sometime. Thanks for
Hey,
sharing your
James, I
insight.
would love. Sorry, James, I would love to do that.
Great.